Frank Levin. Monday, May 30th, 2022, Memorial Day, and my third video uploaded just from this drive. The first two were with my kid on the drive here, which is just a delight and a pleasure. I am in a phase of trying to set good examples for my kid. And to that end, I'm gonna just blow up on YouTube one way or another. I'm gonna figure out how to make it work. Someone just blew through a red there. Oh, what disrespect. And I'm gonna do it in a fairly uncompromising way. I'm gonna do it dealing with the trials and tribulations of life in a dirty YouTube channel. Dirty in that I guess we dropped the occasional F-bomb or whatever, but also dirty in the fact that I don't edit. And there's a strong justification for not editing now in the whole live stream culture that is finally upon us. And, you know, while not a solipsist, I don't believe that the universe exists so that our individual experiences, you know, are provided to us for our entertainment or soul feeding or like a movie or something. But it is not lost on me the fact that just right as I need to do certain things, shift my behaviors in certain ways, that technology just happens to be at the point where it's possible. So I also have a Note 8 where I had somewhere around here, and the Android platform let me upload to YouTube while I continued shooting video. And that was very important to me. It had the shortcoming in that it stopped that video, or it broke the file at each hour. It might have been a file system. That sounds like a file system limitation to me. Someone who chooses between like FAT16 and NTFS and that kind of stuff. I feel the signature of file system limitations because Android will just keep right on recording. It'll just be a different video file. But I could upload one of those video files to YouTube and start recording the next video. And I couldn't in the past on the iPhone, multitasking or not, even if they sort of claimed the multitasking and that it was possible with, you know, allowing an app to run in the background. It never worked out that way. Well, it does now. And I don't think I'm even on the latest. I'm on an iPhone 12. My kid's on a 13. My kid's a generation ahead of me, iPhone-wise. They're on a 13 mini, which was it was a big decision to go with the smaller model. All their friends have the bigger screen phones, but they were on the Steve Jobs phone, the last of the Steve Jobs, you know, contributed design, which was the 5 model. So the 4 was a big step forward. It, you know, that was the one with the antenna gate with that little gap in the stainless steel metal going around it and glass on both sides so that the antenna could get through. And then the frame was used as the antenna as well, and that break in the frame was necessary for resonance or something, and bridging that gap with your finger could make calls drop. So that was the 4. The 4 is very distinctive in my mind. A lot of the iPhone models have really just sort of blended together or faded away in my mind. But not the 4 and not the 5, because the 5 went from that very rugged and eventually perfected stainless steel, you know, perfect rectangular, curved rectangular, very Apple, is very iconically Apple. High quality, durable feel, to a more jewelry, delicate feel of the iPhone 5. And I guess it was the 6 as well, I'm not sure. Certainly like the 5 SE. There were SE models, so the 5 and then the 6 SE, 5 SE, I don't know, SE something. But it had the iPhone 6 electronics inside of it with the iPhone 5 design because it was so beloved. It was the last design that Steve Jobs had input on, and it had a great feel to it. Even though it was a bit more delicate than the 4s, it had a great feel. And I bought my kid their first real phone. They've had hand-me-downs before that, and even when I bought it used. I bought it for VidCon 2018 when I brought my kid to the West Coast for the first time, to California, to Anaheim, California, the location of Disneyland, in order to go to the YouTubers conference called VidCon 2018, while they were still, 8 years old or so, perhaps a bit young to appreciate it. They might have even been 7 at the time, because October, I think it was in October, so their birthday's in November. So they were 7 years old when I brought them to their first YouTube conference. And they had a wonderful inflated bouncy house maze that ran around the length of almost an entire conference room floor. So the kids had something. There were a lot of kids showing up to these VidCon conferences because Jaden and James. No other reason. There was just a ton of fans of Jaden animations and the odd ones out. So it attracted a lot of young conference goers. And my kid was one of them. They wanted to go to it. Oh, there's fireworks going on. So, a couple of the special precautions I took for those conferences were to get them on the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch was the first thing, because I wanted them to be in touch with me, potentially 24/7. If there was any separation of them and me, I wanted them to just, with phone on them or not, to tap their watch. So it was, I forget which generation, but it was the first generation Apple Watch that had cellular built in. The phone did not have to be near it. It was an untethered Apple Watch. They still have it somewhere. Really beautiful model with a pink mesh band. Oh, it's gorgeous, magnetic. A pink mesh magnetic band with a matching aluminized pink casing. Just a gorgeous watch. But even though the phone did not have to be near it, it did need a iPhone to be paired with it. And so at 7 years old, I went shopping for what the best phone choice for my child at the time would be. And I found what must have been the SE model. It was an iPhone 6 on the insides, but a 5 on the outside. And it was the same aluminized pink as the watch. So I thought it all goes together. And I would paint this lovely picture of, tech warrior Addie going off to VidCon and Disneyland. And it worked out exactly as I planned. And while the Apple Watch has come and gone in their life, mostly gone, it's not lost, it's just not important, the pink iPhone SE became deeply beloved. And as the rest of the world was going on to this iPhone 7s and 8s and 9s and 10s or whatever, the Android-atized iPhones, when the distinction between the iPhone and Android became more and more blurred, mostly in Apple copying Android to keep up, right? So there's always a reversal. First Apple innovates, and then the economies of scale of the rest of the world kick in, and things become commoditized, and the specialness that Apple provides starts to fade away. And then the, economy of scale, cost-reduced, commoditized versions of things, i.e. the Samsung phones. It's hard to even think of a second, really. The Samsungs were the one. I fell in love with the Note 8. Oh my God. Start to pull ahead, and then, people really start criticizing Apple for falling behind again. History repeats itself. It's just like when the black and white Macs, when they first came out, were such an innovation with their square pixels and rock solid screen, and then it took forever to get to color, and then they were overpriced when they got to color, and underpowered when they got to color. And the company was no longer led by Steve Jobs. It was now led by John Scully, someone whose business was the Sweetwaters. You know, the father of the Pepsi Challenge was running Apple. And people thought that was a good idea. And then these same people kicked Steve Jobs out. And these same people let PCs pull, you know, far ahead of the Macintosh. Just like during this era, PCs pulled far ahead of my beloved Amiga computer. We're talking 1990, 91, 92, 93. By 1994, PCs were equipped or equipable with such powerful 3D cards and sound cards that the games, the first-person shooter games, I guess it was the era of Quake LAN parties, and Duke Nukem, stuff like that. You know, if I tried to think of another, I'd be mentioning id, but id and Doom are the ones that sort of launched the whole movement in the like 1990, 91. But by the time it got to 94, all the copycat first-person shooter games that allowed you to do, you know, multi-user online over networking, the beginning of the, you know, of the massively online movement, the beginning of what today brain fart. Oh, I can't even think of those names. They're the big ones, you know, the first-person shooters with teams and healers and all that happy stuff. Fortnite is what I'm thinking of. See, you stop struggling and it just pops into your head. So, yeah. So, history repeats itself. The Mac started falling so behind. All the interesting and powerful stuff and appealing to consumer stuff and, frankly, cheaper stuff started happening in the PC world. And that was the exact parallel, the exact equivalent in mobile, with the Android world pulling ahead of iPhones. And Steve Jobs is gone by this time, so, you know, what you gonna do? Well, I don't think Apple still has it figured out. Certainly they had to pick up the pace. And so they shifted. They shifted from features and beauty and features, innovation and simplicity, Apple's hallmark, to just, you know, complete vertical integration. We gotta own everything. It's gotta be our processors. You know, let's eliminate this last bit of money we send to other people to have an ARM processor. Every ARM processor is custom anyway. It's not like Intel chips where Intel manufactures the chips. Every ARM processor comes from some other licensee of the ARM technology, from the ARM holding company. ARM doesn't manufacture anything. They just put out designs. If even that, they put out machine instruction sets. You know, machine code languages. And if you want to use this machine code language, you can also use their designs, and so you can license the machine language or you can license the design. I mean, if you license the design, you're also licensing the machine language. So you could get just the machine language or the machine language plus a design. So what are these designs? You might have heard Cortex. So Cortex is when they started to get powerful and go multi-core, Cortex. And there was different generations of ARM. You know, there's numbered generations, just like there are with Intel generations. Snapdragon is one of them. I forget. Qualcomm and Samsung and TCMU. I always forget it. But one of these Korean companies has become so big. China and Korea are big into these, you know, incredibly tiny ARM designs that use a manufacturing scale of like 5 nanometers that no one else has been able to catch up with. So there's this double whammy on Intel. Manufacturing has gotten smaller than Intel has been able to match reliably with their own manufacturing processes. And the designs that people wish to build with those 5 nanometer fabrication capabilities are not Intel chips, they are ARM designs. So bam, bam, so Intel is feeling it like so hard now. And then this stuff, which was relegated only to mobile, right? It first came to market in these mobile type devices in the Apple Newton. You know, a kooky, like, let's try and leapfrog, let's try and be innovative product under John Scully. So John Scully did actually attempt during the era of these, you know, fizzy water, overpriced, underpowered color Macs. About the only thing going for them is they were still square pixels, just the pixels were square in color now instead of square in black and white. But, you know, only a Quark Express graphic design snob could love these computers. There was a lot of those at Drexel University where I went to school. Ugh, I couldn't stand that. And then the elitist attitude on these computers that were so clearly not as powerful as the Amiga computer, but you know what? They didn't crash either. So they had that going for it. Amigas constantly crashed. But before they crashed, they were running Lightwave 3D and Deluxe Paint, which was way cooler than Quark Express. So things go in these cycles, and the cycle that happened, the desktop computers happened again in mobile phones. But where it was Macs versus PCs and desktop computers, it was iPhones versus Androids in mobile and phone, you know, in phones. That kind of brings us to where we are today. And now I'm even thinking why I brought it up. Oh yeah, I'm uploading my last video to YouTube while I'm shooting this next video. Oh my God. Wow. So, at least Apple is not holding on to their old dogmas. Steve Jobs was not a very big fan of multitasking, or at least he didn't seem to be so. The qualities of a product you got by not multitasking were very Jobs-esque. High levels of reliability, predictability, quality. Reliability and predictability, and always delivering the same product the same way. You know, it always occupying the same amount of time. Predictability. These were Jobs-like things. This is why early iPhones did not have installable apps. They only had the pre-built-in apps. People forget, but the iPhone 1, you couldn't install apps on it. It had a few apps. And even things like, you know, Clipboard was barely worked out. That way you highlighted stuff. You know, it was about a few user interface innovations. I think they did have the Clipboard with the way it magnified in when you highlighted in mobile. And the springy, physics-like way that screen scrolled, so that you scrolled with an accelerated and then decelerating and then bouncy effect. These were the things that Steve Jobs really cared about in those early models. And anything having to do with multitasking threw a wrench in those works, because suddenly the thing would crash for some reason, or something would happen slightly differently than last time. So Steve Jobs turned multitasking off. It doesn't have to multitask. Multitasking is for the buggy Commodore products. We don't have to multitask. And then Android started multitasking and showed the wonderful benefits of apps updating in the background, YouTube being able to upload while you could shoot the next video with a, you know, built-in camera, with a built-in, you know, video software. These two things didn't have to interfere with each other, and the capabilities have just, oh, look at that speed those people, it's insanity. So, by Apple going the route of its own processor hardware, they were able to license the ARM machine instruction sets, but not the ARM designs, like a Cortex design to create like a Snapdragon. Instead, they bought a couple of companies and they put it together and they made their own processors. I forget, it's up to like M1 or M2, the desktop version. They started out doing it in the phones. There was a particular iPhone model, which was the first one that had Apple's own processor design. And then after they did it in the phone, they brought that same innovation, I guess, up to maybe the iPads next, and then up to desktops. And now they're putting it on in all their desktops. And it's a significantly different architecture. It has lots of great advantages, like lower power. Lower power is a huge advantage of ARM architecture over the Intel x86 style architecture. However, being a significantly different architecture as it is, all software has to be either emulated, not virtualized, not containerized, but emulated. There has to be a mapping between the old computer's machine instruction sets and the new computer's machine instruction sets, plus all the special case handling, which I imagine is not insignificant. Apple does it well. Apple did it before. Apple did it when they moved from the PowerPC architecture to the Intel architecture. So they know how to do it, and they did it again, moving from the Intel architecture to the ARM architecture. These are miracles. These are the kinds of pulling off Steve Jobs level stunts that Bill Gates would verbally acknowledge that he admired. You know, people like Bill Gates, the cleverest of thieves, you know, not an ounce of originality, creativity, innovation, but boy, could do a usability test like nobody else, and could, you know, be a clever thief and have a better implementation like nobody else. Like the same way that Linus Torvalds had a better implementation of Unix than Unix. So Linux is the popular thing today, and Unix is barely used except for every Intel processor since 2008, which has it secretly in your machine in the form of Minix as a backdoor. Oh, did I say that out loud? Sorry. You're all running Unix, by the way. It's called Minix. It's a microkernel design written by Andrew Tannenbaum, who probably has like no idea that his stuff is as broadly used as it is. There was classic debates in tech. Stop me before I sub-reference again. Calvin Irby says he only tunes in for the sub-referencing. Okay, so here's a sub-reference for you. The invisible hand version of Unix that's in all your Intel machines, called Minix, which was written by Andrew Tannenbaum, which has a microkernel design as opposed to the monolithic kernel design, is previously only well known for the debates between Linus Torvalds and Andrew Tannenbaum over the merits of each architecture design, operating system, kernel, architecture design. Microkernel in the case of Minix versus monolithic kernel in the case of Linux. Minix versus Linux. Micro versus monolithic. So what does that mean? You ever hear of the microservices debate, or I guess it's microservices debate in web development these days. So basically things can be built so that they're all close to each other and talking to each other fast and proprietary. You just do whatever tricks so that things have whatever efficiencies required so that they run smooth and fast and well all the time. But it's fragile. You can't break these components apart, locate them on different parts of the system. or different parts of the network for that matter, they're tightly coupled, is what they say. The parts are inseparable, tightly coupled. Not a lot of interchangeability, therefore not a lot of room for creative evolution of the Linux kernel. It's kind of an all or nothing, and take it or leave it. Here's the latest Linux kernel. A microkernel design breaks apart its internals into separate parts, discrete parts that can stand alone. They have their own inputs and outputs, and they talk to each other, just like microservices in web design. I want to say modern web design, but it's debated. The advantage of tight coupling versus loose coupling rages on in web dev just as much as it did in Linux kernels. And it seemed to the world that Linus Torvalds, with his monolithic kernel design, just won. Of course, everyone uses Linux and no one uses Minix. But do you remember when PCs, really you had to shut them down between every use? And then when you started them up, it was like a 5-minute wait sometimes. And that's because of all the spyware and bloatware and Trojan horseware and vendorware that was loaded onto your machines and had to reload in on every startup. And the power button was really a hard powered button. When you killed power to a PC, that power was killed. And the state of everything was just lost, right? It wasn't that long ago. It was certainly through the totality of the 90s. It wasn't until getting into somewhere in the, 2010s before the drivers boggle my mind. Before the difference between on and off started going away in a simulation of what we will someday know as universal memory, where the difference between persistent memory that stays when the power is lost, like that on your hard drive, and flash USB drives and SSD, solid state disks, that's persistent memory, and dynamic memory, which must have power applied to it for it to keep its memory. So why wouldn't everyone just use persistent memory? Why have it lose its memory when power is lost? Well, it's speed and heat and speed. CPUs run so fast, they would be hundreds, if not thousands of times slower if they had to read and write from these slow, persistent devices. Persistence means more energy gets put into its, sticky statefulness. You're throwing a bit harder. You're literally throwing that bit in the media harder so that it clicks like a switch into place. And that produces a little bit of heat. If you've ever felt a USB drive heating up as you were copying files onto it, like a keychain drive, and you thought maybe it was your imagination. No, it's not your imagination. It's really heating up. It's heat loss from overcoming the resistance of a bit being thrown. Dynamic RAM doesn't have the resistance of that bit being thrown. It goes back and forth. You can twiddle the bits. In dynamic RAM, millions of times faster. Oh, also it doesn't wear out as fast. So when you have to overcome an initial inertial resistance to get persistence, you can only flip those kinds of things back and forth so many times before the memory wears out, just like any mechanical switch. Honestly, did you think it was as solid state as it seems? It's not. It's not. It's less solid state than you think. And the things that are solid state don't have persistence unless it's written in a write once, read only kind of fashion. That can be fast and persistent, but the persistence is only the original persistence that was built in at the factory, like all Atari game cartridges. That loaded faster than say CD-ROMs and faster than online, but couldn't store to those cartridges. Oh, those new cartridges you can store to? Well, typically those were extra cartridges you bought and put into a special port to do the store. Okay, so you get the idea. When computers went to that kind of blurring the line between on and off, they started simulating universal memory, even though they weren't really universal memory. Universal memory would have the fast reading and writing and the low heat profile and the persistence. We're not there yet. We're inching our way towards universal memory, but it's one of the big technology breakthroughs still out there, kind of like free energy and stuff like it. But until that time, the software can be written and the hardware can be rigged. The software written and the hardware rigged so that you're never really turning the thing off. The power button is not really a hard power button. It's a soft power button. It's a suggestion that runs a piece of software that suggests turning the computer off. And that can kick off a cascading process such that it will assure that your computer will wake up again real fast. It moves things into the right location. It reshuffles things around in memory so that the part that must persist can be kept persistent with a very small drain on your battery. Very small drain on your battery. More on an x86 architecture than on an ARM architecture. But nonetheless, that's why for the longest time, Mac laptops, well, no, they weren't really ARM for a while. So they pulled that off with Intel and PowerPC before that. Macs have always just been better at a simulated off state than Windows has been. But Windows recently caught up. But in catching up, they take advantage of a shadow operating system that's in the background that can do things outside the context of the part you're putting to sleep. Still low power, so small in footprint that it's almost not there. You certainly don't know it's there. But if you hooked up a network sniffer and this thing produced any network traffic, you would see network traffic coming from a different IP. It probably gets it might leech off of the IP of your host computer, because boy would that give away its presence if it really but it has its own network stack, so it probably is using the IP of the Intel based computer on the inside, and it's probably still on Intel. It's a capability of Intel chips, so of course it's Intel. It's just not the x86 proper. It's like a coprocessor, so you have kind of like a coprocessor. And this, I'm not making this up. This is not paranoid rambling stuff. You can Google Intel management engine. It might be engine. Intel management engine. But it has its whole own network stack in there. It's a backdoor. It's a backdoor to every modern Intel-based computer. And ARM has it. Not ARM, sorry. I take that back. AMD has its own version of this. So all the x86 processors have their own version of this. I do not think ARM does. And I believe, while it's not acknowledged, no one would ever say this, I think that this kind of thing really insulted Apple. And when Apple was on the Sandy Bridge processor, and it started to get flaky and didn't meet Apple's quality and power consumption and other standards, when the Intel CPU started to be the weakest link in the chain from an Apple quality assurance standpoint and an autonomy as a company standpoint. Are you free as a company if you're putting a processor in your products that have another company able to step in and do stuff? And you can bet it's, admin level. It's root, fully privileged, backdoor stuff. Mostly for benign purposes. But in a pinch, it's there. You know, you don't think it's going to be used if someone needs to get into your machine for some reason. In a pinch, it's there. You know, backdoors are backdoors. So I think Apple objected to that at about the Sandy Bridge era. I don't know. It wasn't 2008 when this stuff first started to appear, but it might have been by like 2012 or so. And ARM started really busting on the scene in 2012 because of the Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi really changed the world starting at around 2012 when I did the first Raspberry Pi unboxing on the internet. And Apple saw the writing on the wall. Control it or die. We're already the masters of ARM because, you know, they started taking control of their own silicon for the phones, their own ARM designs for the phones. So it only makes sense that they carry through on that strategy and do their own, you know, processors through and through. The only backdoors in an Apple processor is Apple's backdoors. I can't speak to that. I have no idea what capabilities they have to do in your machine when it's turned off and shut, but I would assume Apple has full admin level control over your machine when it's turned off and shut, just like Intel has over your Windows machines. It's hard to imagine it could be any other way this day and age. So, you gonna let it bother you? I don't. What are you doing? So, you know, if you're sharing secrets with the Russians, then you probably deserve this level of, you know, monitoring. Or if you're planning something against, you know, people, not people in general, like private, personal stuff, that's nobody's business. But if you're doing something that endangers, you know, the peace and security of a land, then these things should be there. Because in the era of super threats, one must have super police. Super police deal with super threats. Are the threats really so super? I don't know. Maybe you have super police and not super threats, and then it becomes a, you know, dystopian future. These are the risks. These are the risks. But there's enough points of light, 1,000 points of light, right? Do your own stuff. You know, I'm not saying design your own computers. I'm not saying burn them from sand. But, you know, try some Raspberry Pi projects. Try doing things on kooky different hardware. Download my Linux and try doing something on Linux. Just get an idea that different worlds exist out there. And some of those worlds, you can know everything that's going on. Again, you don't have to burn them from sand, but if you were basing something on a Arduino, look at the Arduino design. Look at what goes on to an Arduino board. Look at that Atmel, you know, limited memory integrated circuit that goes on the Arduino board. It's much simpler than a Raspberry Pi. And just drink it in. Absorb the issues of that would be, so the Arduino versus the Raspberry Pi is the issue of a microcontroller with limited programmability versus a integrated circuit and full system on a chip with high levels of programmability. So the Raspberry Pi was a generalized computer, and there were generalized computers like it beforehand that were like Raspberry Pi before Raspberry Pi. They just didn't have the Broadcom graphics chip. The sponsors of the Raspberry Pi were convinced to put a GPU on even the original Raspberry Pi so it could run a graphical desktop. It could run games and could have something that looked like Windows or Mac. And so the Raspberry Pi became popular where the Rascal that came before it didn't. The Rascal was more expensive, like $100, and didn't have the ability to run a graphical desktop, but it had Python built in. It had the same Python incentive as the Raspberry Pi for Python. While Python is not necessary for the Raspberry Pi, Python was part of the motivating factor, because if you're gonna put a learning computer in people's hands, a la the BBC Micro or the Commodore 64, you want to do better than the built-in basic programming language. You want Python. So the Raspberry Pi, before the Raspberry Pi, the Rascal had Python built in. When the Raspberry Pi came out, while it didn't necessarily have Python included with the Raspbian distro, it was easy enough to get because it was based on a Debian version of Linux. And Debian versions of Linux, it's easy to install Python, apt to install Python, or in those days, apt-get install Python. Things are changing a little bit. So, there's still so much going on in a Raspberry Pi that a human would be hard-pressed to understand every trace of the integrated circuit, every component on the little motherboard, every I/O port. It's still a bit of a challenge. It's a little bit more than a human can wrap their minds around. Not so much with the Arduino with its Atmel chip or whatever it is. I might get it confused with the competitor to Melange, Spice, and Dune. I always get the chip on the Arduino, the name of the chip on the Arduino, confused with the name of the it's not the Ben Gesserit Sisterhood, but there's another female force to be reckoned with in the Dune universe that use a different spice than Melange, the worm spice of Arrakis. And they both have similar names. It's something like Atmel or something. So that processor on the Arduino is about 1 megabyte or 512K, some ridiculously small amount of programmable space, and its own machine instruction set and its own I/O ports, but so many less machine instruction sets, so much less programmable memory, so much less I/O ports that a human can really understand it. You might even be able to understand every trace on the integrated circuit. It's still an integrated circuit, even though it's a microprocessor versus a general purpose computer. An IC is an IC. Anything with that black squarish look to it is an integrated circuit. There's chips called 555 chips that are just simple time or pulse chips. Those are integrated circuits too. And they're replacing capacitors and resistors and diodes, things that would come in a Radio Shack kit that you would, put on those springs and connect them together to make sirens and flashing lights. Same basic idea, but it's integrated onto a chip. And to understand how these things work, you would have to look at the design of that chip and look at the traced lines. A famous one that I mention occasionally is Commodore 6502 chip. It was originally Moss's 6502 chip, and it was originally Moss's copy of the Motorola 6800 chip. Might have been 68,000 by that time, but maybe the 6800 chip. And so you can see the naming similarity, the Motorola 6800 and the Moss 6502, so that would have made it 6502 would have made it 6500, the 6500 chip. It's clever. It's, engineers just riffing off of each other's processor names, knocking a decimal off and saying they're knocking a decimal off the price as well. Yours is $250, ours is $25. We're Moss, you're Motorola, haha. And MOS, MOTOROLA. See? And the MOS technology is in CMOS. Nerd jokes run deep, and rarely are one nerd joke. If you spot a good nerd joke, there's probably two layers of meanings at minimum. And if it's a good joke, there's 3 or 4 layers of meaning. Double entendres. Unix being one of the best examples. You know what I mean. Huh, am I rambling now? Am I getting anywhere? Shall I sub-reference again? I guess that's it. Unix is just as broadly deployed as Windows, because for every Windows machine, there's also a little copy of Unix there. Making Linux in sheer numbers of installed bases fabulously smaller as the leading NICs than people had traditionally thought, because Minix via the Intel management engine is much more widely deployed than all Linuxes of the world put together. Trust me, every CPU. If the Intel CPU is running Linux, it also has Minix on there too, so you're running Unix and Linux together on every Intel-based Linux machine. Can you believe it? Can you believe that technology is this way? Somewhere in the 2000s, like, you know, human beings, individual human beings lost all, you know, notion of what's going on. It has completely reached that Arthur C. Clarke point where things become indistinguishable from magic. Even if you think you understand it all, you don't. You don't know what's going on in your machine. Can't wait to get home. I hope to sleep well. We'll see. I talked plenty about all that tech stuff and the Linuxes and the Unixes and the Microsofts and the x86s and the ARMs. I wish this were live. I now want to look at chat and see the input from Calvin Irby and Computer Chronicles and Celtic Orthodox Prayer and Bonnie, whose name I'll never be able to pronounce. Jur has come up on the scene. Once these commutes are gone, man, can you imagine all this time going into live casts? Actually working on a particular project instead of 6 hours a week just flushed. It's not flushed down the toilet. This gives me an excuse to not feel like I have to be doing something aside from not crashing. I mean, you know, that's accomplishing something. The endless reminder of how important muscle memory and habit and coprocessors are, right? Without these drives, would I be nearly so reminded how related to what's happening to technology and what should be happening in people overcoming anxiety driving is. People who are plagued by anxiety in their life, I will venture a guess, are not drivers. Drivers has a certain forced zoning. Driving has a certain forced alternation between the zone and voluntary control. Driving is a lot like breathing. I talk about the body functions that live in the vibrating edge between involuntary and voluntary, and we can just knock it back and forth. We walk automatically when we're not thinking. We don't think about walking. However, once we do think about walking, we can control walking parameters like speed and whether we're power walking, how much energy we're putting into it, whether we're skipping, whether we're moonwalking, you know. There's a lot of parameters, but still you don't think about it so precisely that it's the mechanics of it. Same with catching a ball that's thrown to you. You're not calculating the parabolic motion with your conscious mind. There's not enough time to do that. So you're really pushing, still zoned in the zone at the animal level, completely muscle memory. You're pushing unconscious behavior into different patterns with conscious thought. Think about that. Think about what you're really doing when you speed up or you slow down your walking pace, or you switch to a skip, or you switch to a saunter. Oh my God, like, wow, the stuff that's going on in the body and the ballet dance between parts of the mind that are, sentient and conscious in that very human language center way, and the parts of the brain that are still like completely on automatic, outside even your ability to access and control. Try skipping between different ways. Try rubbing your tummy and patting your head, right? These things are bound together. There's automatic patterns that just kick in and take over. You know how to activate them with a conscious mind. You just don't know the precise mechanics of what you're activating. So that's walking, but think about other ones. You don't sweat on command necessarily, so there's ones that don't live in that realm. But ones that do are blinking. Take control of your blinking very easily. Alternate between left and right eye. But when you're not doing that, you immediately revert to the subconscious blinking. Your body takes over as soon as you give back control. Breathing. Breathing is the biggie. Breathing is the one that separates people capable of voluntary control of their body from those who are completely at the mercy of their non-thinking inner animals. I think that was 309. That was probably the one I wanted. I'm almost sure it is. I gotta look back. See, I always deliberately pass 310, knowing it sneaks up on me too fast. But sometimes when I'm zoned out, there's a risk there. See? 309 just zips past me, but it's okay. I'm not in a rush to get home. We'll just do it the easy way. Get off at 310. Go over the overpass, under the underpass, whichever it is, and come on back. And I'll keep you with me through it all. A wrong turn. That's good for this type of discussion, isn't it? Right? I'm trying to blow up. I'm not going to blow up with these long rambling videos. This is like completely the opposite of the stuff that makes people blow up. But I'm doing a few interesting things if you want to know specifically what I'm doing. So, first of all, teaching is learning. The best way to learn is to teach. So always be teaching, even if it's teaching yourself, even if it's going through things in your mind to refresh for yourself. If you find yourself angry or bored, you might be finding yourself facing the inner animal who doesn't have the kind of voluntary control that you want to see in, say, breathing exercises. In through the nose, out through the mouth. In through the nose, out through the mouth. And if you do that, say, 10 times, you will have convinced the average person who cares about such things that you really do still have control. Now we look for the over by don't even think I've ever taken this exit. I hope it doesn't just put me on a highway in the wrong direction. I think it completely did that. U-turns. Yay! It gives me a place for U-turns. How nice is that? I think that was my way to do a U-turn. It was back that way. Okay, so all things considered, no cars are at all around. To Route 46 to West Shore. What the heck? No, well, this is an underpass, so I'll get back onto the highway I got off of by going under the overpass. And it's got to be from this side that a I-80 entrance is available again. And if it's not, I wrap up the video here, switch back to GPS, and call that a lesson well learned. Nope, I did it exactly right. I figured it out. I-80 east back to New York for just one exit. Whew. So the cognitive, the automatic animal thing can sometimes not do the right thing, so you override it with your more language-based frontal cortex thinking capability. You make observations, you look around, you're aware of the functions of overpasses and underpasses, and you keep your spatial sense where you are in relation to the road you just got off of, and what you must have to do as far as getting to the other side of the road to have an entrance back onto it in the other direction. Think. And then you don't even need GPS to correct yourself from these things. You can just look around and do it the old-fashioned way, old school, right? What am I advocating aside from old school? But I also love the new tools, the new power tools. This whole thing started out in the fact that I am so impressed that the iPhone can allow you to upload the last video while you're shooting the new video. You know when I thought that was going to happen? When hell freezes over. I thought it was the most un-Apple-like thing to ever expect, and that no matter how much you could turn on processing in the background, that the actual upload to YouTube over 5G or whatever connection you would have, that it just wouldn't be allowed to happen. That for whatever reasons, for Apple quality assurance purposes, they would just click off the ability shoot it in the other direction. I certainly don't want to go through the tolls to go back into Pennsylvania again. Although it's like just $2 or something, it's not that big of a thing. Did I really? Do not tell me. Is this video still usable? How much of my human flaws do I really want to share with the world? I turn around way before I had to? I think I might have. What I thought was missing my exit was probably yet again another brain fart. I was just getting close to crossing over into Pennsylvania. I'm still Jersey side. Adoy. Oh. Yeah, so when do mistakes happen? Mistakes happen when you're under pressure. How often do I really do this when I'm shooting these YouTube videos? I guess once in a great while, but I see the exit I want coming up. I got a good one coming up. Turn myself around, get myself right back on track, turn the air conditioner up. And we're at an hour. This is the place where if it were the Note 8, chop, that video would have stopped right there and I would have had to have done multiple uploads. So consider this all bonus time because you're on the iPhone. Last video uploading, that strange last video of facing out to the road. Let's see who has the patience to watch all that. It's a good time. It's a good time. People present themselves as much more flawless than they actually are. Much of the truth, and see, I'm looking around. I see overpasses, I see underpasses. I'm not going to need GPS for this. And watch how the Cloverleaf exit is looping me around. I feel myself heading towards the underpass, and it certainly is. So I went I-80 West again, I-80 West. That's it above me, so it's just a matter of looking at these side things. It's gonna up to I-80. Oh, keep left. Left for I-80. They will bring you through the neighborhood. Make sure you see all their restaurants and local businesses. Good for them. Good for them. Once you've been through their business route, you may now go back to the highway. West towards the Delaware Water Gap. Yes, Delaware Water Gap. Food for the soul. Oh, no wonder East Stroudsburg is the worst place to buy a home now, you know. All these New Yorkers who did the exact same thing as I did. The best highway out west, because you don't want to stay on the coast in the pandemic. All these coastal places have, you know, that's where stuff gets you. They fly in through airports, and all the airports are on the coastal port cities, all the international airports. I mean, not all of them. Sure, there's airports that are international airports that are inland, but for the most part, you're going to find your large international airports and your Philadelphias and your Newarks and your New Yorks. So you go inland and you go to the mountains. You go to the mountain range, right? Because fewer people, cheaper land, easier to defend from the high ground. Middle That's because I'm going at a decent speed for a 65 mile per hour road. I get too entangled. That sensitive part of me is, well, it's aware of the cars around me for starters. And if someone's passing me on the right fast, I'm like, that triggers an alarm. Am I going too slow in the left? Well, no, I'm not in the left. I'm in the middle. I'm definitely not going slow. But most people think if the speed limit is, say, 65, that they're allowed to go up to like 75. Most people think there's like a 10 mile per hour plus or minus, not plus or minus, 10 mile per hour plus. I am not of that thinking. '75 is just so fast. Do I speak of brain farts? Getting velocitized, the dangers of multitasking. Isn't that interesting? So, graceful recovery from multitasking, ungraceful recovery from multitasking, how it manifests in humans, how it manifests in computers, how the computer I fell in love with used a certain style of preemptive multitasking without a memory management unit, consequently crashing the entire system when multitasking went wrong. The Amiga's big fatal downside was that it crashed a lot. That was a big fatal downside. The ability to forgive the Amiga for that really made you a Charlie Brown or a Roomba personality. That thing in me that keeps me going might be very much from my Amiga experience. Maybe. I'm not 100%. Oh, I see why I got confused. It's because of the Stroudsburg signs when I got around to about this point. Yup. See exactly what I did. I see why I did it too. Alright. Noted for the future. Interesting realization, having fallen in love with the Amiga with things like Deluxe Paint, right? So you fall in love with a hardware platform because of some magical capability or secret weapon. I mean, so many people do it with games today, but the more it's a creative thing, the better it is for you. It's just better for you to be creative. It celebrates being human to be creative. And so the Amiga computer helped me celebrate being human because Deluxe Paint, period. There were other things, but at the end of the day, it was one piece of software that really had an extremely long life. Even after the Amiga was dying, game developers were still using Deluxe Paint from Electronic Arts to do components of games because it was the best way to design these game components, these, little graphic pieces that became building blocks of some bigger environment. deluxe paint. And it was very keyed to the Amiga. Very keyed to the Amiga. There were versions of deluxe paint on other computers, but it never really felt the same. It never triggered the joy that deluxe paint on the Amiga triggered. Quite difficult to explain. It might have had something to do with the bitmaps, because the Amiga had a weird graphic system that let things work really smooth and fast at a lower bit plane than other computers. So if you wanted things remarkably fast, you would go to a lower number of bit planes, which gave you correspondingly fewer colors. But the smoothness at which things happened was out of hand smooth. I mean, for 1987 when I was using it, 1985 when it came out, it really felt like alien technology. So smooth were the graphics on the screen. And you could do little tricks, like especially when Deluxe Paint started supporting animation, you could go to a low bit plane, like 2-color, and then you could add an enormous number of frames. And then you could hold down like a special modifier key, it might have been the Amiga key, and then start drawing with whatever brush you clipped out and happened to be holding. And that brush just flew around the screen so that when you played back the animation, you saw the brush follow your hand motion. And such simple things were so spiritually moving. And you combine this with other tricks. So that was the bit plane trick. The next trick that the Amiga had that lived well with these other tricks was called color cycling. It was a form of animation where they just moved what color populated each color register. So you had these moving color rainbow effects. And so when you used these moving color rainbow effects in conjunction with animation, or frankly not, either way, it had a mesmerizing, second degree of engagingness. So if it was animated and color cycling, wow, it blew the mind. These were things that no other computer of its day, and certainly no home computer, could even come close to. I remember designing animated pointers, pulsing gold animated pointers, little squiggling snakes. So your pointer could be a little squiggling snake animated as you move your hand around in probably by that time for the software to be refined enough for that, you're talking 88, 89, the real heyday of the Amiga. You could see a lot of this spirit come through in the mod community. So it was like the rave community. It was like synthesized music community. Back in the day when it was like still a novelty to hear computer music at all, to hear quality sounding computer music at all. And the Amiga computer music was like this awesome, pulsing, hypnotizing electronica with more classical instruments like layered in with channel effects. It was just mind-blowing. Again, the nearly alien seeming, otherworldliness seeming aspect of the Amiga really shone through when you combined that, Technica type music with the animation and the color cycling. And if you weren't limited to Deluxe Paint, if you were doing your animated effects through like, homegrown physics engines and, bouncy spiral math patterns and stuff, you could create profoundly hypnotizing, zone-inducing experiences. I think they had the equivalent in Europe. It was pretty big to have almost like the equivalent of rave parties, but it was geeks playing mod files for each other. Truly love-worthy. Truly and deeply love-worthy. A certain similar spirit existed on the Atari ST, especially in the music community, in controlling external music devices or writing your music with external music devices. MIDI, the music interfaces, really caught on with the Atari 520 STs much more than it did the Amigas. So while the Amiga did that sort of stuff, it was still mostly about mod files with the Amiga, the built-in synth and stuff. But the smooth graphics of the Amiga, the Atari had something similar. On the Amiga, it was called the Blitter chip. And where the Amiga was very closely modeled on Unix, the Atari, I think, had something called TOPS, the TOPS operating system, which may have been modeled on something called CPM, which was the, I guess, the operating system that was made for the Zilog processors. Zilog processors, Z80 processors, which were to that generation of computers what the MOS chips were to the Motorola computers. So Z80s were the cheap knockoffs of the Intels. The $250 chips were available for $25 for home computers in the form of the Z80 processor, whereas the Motorola 68000 chips were available for the $250 68000 chips were available in the $25 form in the form of the MOS 6502s. But Amigas didn't use 6502s. That was the Commodore 64 and the VIC-20 that came before it, the computer that led up to the Commodore 64, the VIC-20. They used 6502, possibly even 6501s. It had to be revved to 2 for a conflict of intellectual property with Motorola. They forced them to redo some of the chip designs. So when the Amiga came along, using chips like the 6502 as its processor was a possibility. It was on the table. But the creators of the Amiga, J. Minor, fought for and got the actual 68,000 chip, the more expensive one. And the Amiga was no cheap computer. I think it was like $1,200 when it came out. So $1,200 for a home computer left room for a $250 CPU chip in there. Cut into the margin a lot, but it was a lot more powerful than the 6502 alternative. And thus started the movement of home computers having the more grown-up chips. Kind of beginning of the end for the home computer market, that really cheap $250 for the whole computer, right? That were those early expectations, because people didn't see the value of a computer at all in their home. So, it seems cheap by today's standards. You can hardly get a decent tablet for $250. Of course, the inflation's. But that's not really true. You can get a Amazon Fire for well under that. That is really high performance. So, it's all relative. But, people like my parents were unwilling to pay $1,000 for this strange thing that they didn't see the value of at all in the first place. So companies like Commodore in the day could only charge, a few $100s for these first generation home computers that had the cheaper CPUs in them. like the Z80s and the 6502s. As computers became more popular and their value was clear, even if they were mostly used for games, even if gaming was still their main purpose, people saw the value of a computer in their house and would shell out the $1,000, the $1,500, and so the Amiga 1000 was in that realm, and that's how it could get away with having the Motorola 68000 chip in it instead of one of the cheapies. I can't believe how much sooner I thought I was near that exit than I really was. Ugh. Should have just been able to look at the clock and tell, but you know, brain fart. It's probably what I'll title this video, brain fart. People love passing on the right. They can just as easily pass on the left more appropriately. I mean, I'm still going 70. I got cruise control fixed. I'm going at a steady speed right down the middle. It's like as if they're making some statement. You're going so slow, I pass you on the right. But once they get past me, they go back to the middle lane. So that's a BS statement if that's what they're trying to say. Anger management. So anxiety may have been my problem at some point in my life, in my earlier days. I guess I got a handle on anxiety. Things just don't bother me as much as they used to. That worry that everything is like so big and the most important thing ever, and your life is going to be over if you don't tend to this one thing. Not so much in my mind anymore. Not my thing. But anger, I guess I have my share. I once said that to someone, and then, you know, they latched right onto it. Oh, your anger, and they said it so angrily. And it took me years to realize that still, my level of anger barely registers on the scale compared to the type of person who's going to latch onto that and beat you up over it for years. I finally said to that person, I said, look, you know, I know I said that once, but really, look at me. Do I seem like that angry of a person? I'm certainly managing it. If I have anger, it's being managed. Maybe a little bit of bitterness that needs to be, you know, dealt with, faced, and dispelled, the power taken away from it. But I know that. I work towards it. But it's nothing compared to what I feel projected at me in, you know, every breath, every interaction. I think that comes from an anxious place, though, too. I think anxiety and anger are sometimes tied together in ways that create a self-fueling, the wrong sort of righteous feedback loop, the toxic feedback loops. So there are righteous feedback loops, which are the kind you're trying to create, where an ability is being increased and a habit is being formed. You're both, it's double whammies. I speak much of double whammies because things have to have a lot going on to have an accelerating effect. You can't, paddle against the wind and against the tide and expect to make good ground. But if you're going with the river, if you're going in the direction of the water flowing and the wind is in your sails, that's a double whammy win. You're just going to keep going and going. And so you're striving for that kind of advantage in the little things of everyday life that you do. And that's the difference between a righteous feedback loop that's working for you and a toxic feedback loop that's working against you. if you are both increasing the type of abilities that work as your super weapons, your secret weapons, and become internalized, and you're doing it in such a way that you have to do it every day. You put it in your path, you encounter it, and you have to solve that problem. Like a perfect example would be using Vim for your personal journal. You're both learning Vim and you're journaling. Righteous feedback loop. Before long, you'll know so much more Vim than you would have if you didn't get that practice in. And you'll know so much more about yourself because you're journaling. This is at 1 hour and 25 minutes in. The good advice comes at 1 hour and 25. I should database index these things and say, if you want to know about this, jump to here in the video. If you want to know about that, jump to that in the video. I'm kind of, sort of half relying on the artificial intelligences of the future to do that for me. I'm not going to do that. Are you kidding? I'm just going to upload this like any other video. Perhaps put a title on it that maybe does justice to some small portion of it. I probably won't even keyword it or embed it into one of my web pages in my blogging system. So many videos I produce, especially these long types. This is really interesting. It's like the entire drive. This will be the entire 1.5 hour drive plus a wrong turn and reversing myself back. So if there's any question of how long this drive is without traffic, wow, this is Memorial Day weekend, but I'm driving back out to the mountains. So if there was traffic tonight, it was on my drive in, which I did encounter some, so I saw some of that. But driving back out into the mountains from the city, no traffic, basically empty roads. All to myself, and I like it that way. Boy, it's sure going to be the hardcore fans that listen to these things. When do you listen? If there's anyone there, and anyone actually got to this portion, under what conditions would you hear me talking? You're certainly not watching at this point. I'm going to assume anyone who's with me right now is listening to it much like a podcast and is just tolerating the terrible audio that must exist because of the background noise of being in the car. But again, 80-20 rule, I only do this because the phone happens to be in my pocket and it's so easy to do. As soon as I start making concessions to this, like the way, vloggers do with nice equipment or whatever, or what else, in the car, I don't know. Special micro, it's nice equipment, that's what it would be. It'd be thinking ahead. It just rubs me the wrong way. I mean, I'm sorry for you people who have to listen to the terrible car noises in the background. And what makes it worse is I'm running the air conditioner and I'm in a Jeep. I'll turn the air conditioner down. We don't need that going. Quite as high. I'll turn it off. Resiliency. How much could I ever, talk too much about resiliency? Anti-fragile, the concept of anti-fragile is coming into the public mind. There's at least one book on the topic. Things have to have perturbances. You need to infuse the hits and the variation and the, highs and lows. And, you need that in order for a system to achieve stability, to continue to exist. I presume life is like that. That's the battle between order and chaos in all things. Too much order and things settle down to a boring state, and there is some sort of collapse or ruin because excessively ordered stuff. You go the other direction and things have variation and, flexibility, and you go too much in that direction orbits, the concept of orbits, and more broadly the concept of circles comes into the picture then. If you're pursuing truth, if you're looking for truth, things are attracted to things, and then things repel things, and these attractive and repulsive forces, have switch off when they get to certain distances. So something that is attractive suddenly gains a repulsive force at a certain distance, and not always. They can spiral into each other. It's not like any equilibrium is ever assured. So based on what sort of system it is, the ability to reach equilibrium varies, and stable systems generally have things in orbit around each other, so that there are forces that normally would allow things to just spiral off or spiral in are perfectly balanced, so that they keep circling around and around and around. The moons orbit the planets orbit the sun is in a arm of a galaxy, and the galaxy is spiraling around its center. I wonder what galactic clusters are. Is there spiraling in galactic clusters? Is that stuff in orbit of each other? Do we see the orbit structure? What holds a galactic cluster together? What makes a galactic cluster? Why is there a cluster here and not there? Why is it clustered? Why is there space in between? So I'll probably Google that. That's something of interest. I've seen some things on Instagram, of all places. Maybe I've seen it on Reddit too, that maps out the known universe. It actually does this in a series of scaled pictures. So maybe I'll dig one of those up and look at what galactic clusters seem to be implying. What is it about galactic clusters? Non-locality, strange action at a distance. On the one hand, it would seem that the distance between things, as implied by the galactic scale and the observable universe, those are probably the two biggies, right? Because viewing galaxies as entities to the point where you can say, here's one galactic cluster and here's another, you're in the scale where a lifetime could never get anyone from one to the other. Just if faster than light travel is not possible, then these worlds will just never have any impact on each other at all. The light from one universe will functionally never reach the other universe. The other universe, are the universes, for all intents and purposes, they're other universes, because if there's not interaction between the systems, but there must be. If you can see Galactic Cluster 1 and Galactic Cluster 2, then light's reaching and there is impact on each other. There might be gravity waves and stuff like that reaching each other. Can't wait to get home. Here's where I thought I was before. Keep it? Yeah, probably. Probably I keep this one. I should talk just a little bit to fuzz it. Fuzz it, fuzz it, fuzz it, fuzz it. Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear. Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair. This is the song that never ends. Ugh. so glad I did movie night with my kid tonight. I'm so glad it started with Mean Girls. We have Heathers on the agenda. And once we do Heathers, I believe I will have their interest piqued enough so that I can segue into my Burt Reynolds Moby Dick. The White Whale. Regardless of how well the whole thing is performed, the Burt Reynolds Moby Dick audio track or audio performance, it's like chapter 2 or it might be chapter 3 where they talk about the 2 clam chowders that just impresses me the most of the whole thing. Ishmael going into the tripods or whatever it is. I'm getting Harry Potter confused with it, but going into the famous restaurant in that location and having the clam chowder and the cod chowder, and how impressed Ishmael is by those 2 soups. It just gets me every time. It reminds me of how much I love seafood and how much I have to, remind myself to get it into my and my family's life, because my tendency is to do steaks. I see my kid little enough that when I do see them, if I can do 2 steak nights in a row, and I make a mean steak, let me tell you, the soy sauce and the crushed garlic and the smoked sea salt. The only thing that can make my mouth water more is that chapter from Moby Dick about those 2 seafood chowders. Food is good. If you're depressed, find your favorite foods. If you're depressed, drink lots of water. If you're depressed, get some exercise. If you're depressed, get some exercise that combines the good food and the nice scenery, walking through the woods, lots of green, things to look at. See if you can spot some wildlife. Surprise yourself. If you're depressed, trying to surprise yourself through some aspect of your exercise and your eating well. I don't know how you surprise yourself with hydration. I've got a drinking problem. I'll never get over Macho Grande. Boy, get a chance to deliver a line like that and I flub it. There's nothing to see here. Please disperse. I had roommates when I lived in Virginia working for Scala Multimedia, later Scala Digital Signage, who spoke in movie quotes, who basically spoke in movie quotes. It was Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra 24/7. And as much as I love those 2, and as much as I love the occasional movie quote, oh my God, I would, they would call it banter, and I would call it prattle. And I would tell them they're prattling again. And here I am, picking up those exact same habits, and deeply proud of my kid for doing that. I was wearing this shirt today with Planet Express, and my kid was doing their Mickey Mouse impression, which is really good. And I said, I've got to channel my inner Fry. And she's like, Fry? I'm like, yeah, the delivery guy from Futurama. And without missing a heartbeat, they were like, take my money. I forget the exact quote, but they delivered it in Fry's voice, I don't care, take my money now, something like that. And I was like, whoa. And they tried to play it down like it's a popular meme. And I'm like, yeah, it might be a popular meme, but you're a talented mimic. Being able to mimic things you hear and make your voice modulate like those characters, what a friggin' talent. Haha. I can see why one would start with Mickey Mouse, but it quickly builds the confidence to go on to other characters. And yeah, my kid's got talent on multiple levels. If it's not the voices, it's the artwork and the drawing, which is already at animation. I was like 18 years old before I was doing animating on the Amiga, and now at 11 years old, they're doing animating in 3 different programs and 3 different styles with, you know, starting to really flesh out their stories. I'm like, wow. And the writing of the stories, it's not just the animation, it's not just the writing of the stories, and not just the mimicking of the voices. But then this kid, despite all that goes on in their life, living all these different places through the course of their life, different places in New York, in Pennsylvania, they seem healthy and well balanced. Every time they're with me, it's like just a delight. And I teach them stuff. They're open to things, you know. My whole discussion of how the original jawbone and vertebrae evolved together as like a similar function, and then split and then drifted like, you know, the continents on the planet during the age of Pangea. I tell you, the next time I talk to them about that, they'll be able to describe that to me. That's the leading edge of science. That is not necessarily even established fact yet. That's being speculated at. But the deep channeling of life, of the, you know, of what that means about life, and like how their father is behaving, and the concept of growing a backbone. They understand that. They forgive their father for his being human and shortcomings. They appear to not be bitter, and appear to not be building up the same anger issues that I had built up in life. And I think I am blessed with everyone thinks it, an extraordinary child, destined for great things, terrible things, but great. Magic wands, Lunderwand, that impressed upon them too. I have a definite love for the geek humor, the double, triple humor. So to get a word like Lunderwand, which is both Wonderland and a poo-flinging wand, is mwah. Yeah, I gotta use that domain for something. Maybe it'll be my stories. I often think I ought to assume a pen name and publish my stories under a pen name, a pseudonym. Because have I got stories that probably best not done as my name or connected to me in any way. But, you know, of the stories I can tell, there's that time I shot a guy. Imagine the ones I'm not telling. Tune in for another exciting episode of What Are You Not Telling Us? I didn't want any of that. That stuff was thrust upon me. I've been in boot camp. Life has been a drill sergeant for me. I'm a poozer. And I'm only just toughening up to the level that boot camp drill sergeants try and get you to toughen up to. Like, I'm coming out of boot camp. I'm coming out of life boot camp at 50 years old, right? 51, this last year, I'm going to count towards, you know, flipping from explore to exploit, flipping from boot camp under the drill sergeants to making it for myself. And I'm starting out with like a 10,000 YouTube following, right? So unlimited uploadability. Some of the points I'm making here is I'm doing a lot of this because YouTube don't care. I'm an hour and 45 minutes in. If I didn't make that wrong turn, it'd be an hour and a half. I lost 15 minutes on that. So, you know, if YouTube lets me do this, why shouldn't I do it? I don't really even expect people to be listening to it. It's just I can talk forever. Give me a topic or don't give me a topic. Just give me a mic. I love my mic. I'm mic loving. I've got a mic. I'm Mike Levin. Something like that. Oh, I gotta memorize that poem. I have a poem which is almost perfectly my name with the unique Philadelphia. It's also the Israeli pronunciation. So if you know Levins, they're either from Philly or Israel. So I've got a poem that uniquely captures my name, plus my regional pronunciation, plus my love to talk in a mic, and the fact that my name sounds like lovin'. So double, triple entendre nerd jokes. I mean, I've got the poem that does it. I've got it on the homepage of mikelev.in, mikelove.in. If I say mikelove.in, people are going to type the wrong thing. So I guess when I give the domain, it has to be mikelev.in because there's no misunderstanding that. But then it undoes the good work of getting back to my regional pronunciation. Oh, it's so hard to do, to switch between pronunciations. That's something that was done to me. That was part of boot camp. I get it. I understand. As long as it's, you know, deliberate choice and you can control it and go back and forth as you wish, you know. Sometimes you keep things, sometimes you make them part of yourself, no matter what source it came from. You don't feel yourself manipulated into it. You feel like, well, I tried something, and so what? It's because of that person. I like my long hair, no ponytail. It's cool. It's certainly easier to manage and maintain. I haven't had a formal haircut in like forever. You just trim off the split ends. Shaving is just as easily. You keep that beard at the number 5.5 setting, and so easy. An electric razor, clip off the ends. You know, you're groomed. Nose hairs, you gotta get those nose hairs. I guess on that note, I wrap this one up. Thanks for joining me. Can't believe that you did. What are you, nuts? And yeah, no, thank you. Thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart. If I'm gonna talk, it's good for the soul to know that there's people who care enough to listen. And you know, I'm connecting with people out there. I'm connecting with people like I haven't done since the Amiga days. I was tempted to say like I've never done, but really like I haven't done since the Amiga days. So I'm deeply grateful for that. Thank you for all the people I shout out to, and you know, I'll learn to ramble your names off real smooth and easy. But a special one to Celtic Orthodox prayer. You're there in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day. You must pay attention to those notifications of my live casts when they pop up. So cool, thanks a lot. Cop. And I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.